So I'm going to start. I didn't realize that was going to happen. Let's do that. Okay. So I'm going to start by going through Illustrator and kind of orienting you to the application. So Illustrator is Adobe Illustrator. It's located here. The AI orange box here on your screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some things in Illustrator up here. So I would encourage you to follow along up here, take notes, and then we'll have time for you to actually implement that. So that way, if you have questions or whatever, we can chat about that in a second. So, but this is where it's located. It's Adobe Illustrator. If I go ahead and click that, I actually have a file that's already open. But usually what would happen is it would just give me a prompt and it'll ask me if I wanted to start a new file. At that point in time, I can choose a different, any different type of file size. But this is what we're going to be doing. The next thing that you're typically going to be doing in Illustrator is we're typically illustrating something. And so because we're typically using Illustrator for illustrative purposes, oftentimes we start off with an existing sketch. So what you're going to do is, in class today, actually, you're going to take one of the sketches that you created for this first project. You've already digitized them. You're going to bring that into Illustrator, and you're actually going to try to illustrate that sketch. So that's what we're going to be doing in class after I've kind of introduced some of this. What I'm going to do is, in addition to kind of orienting you to this program, I'm going to show you. We'll pick a couple examples from this student's set of sketches from previous time, and I'll show you some techniques that you can use to illustrate a logo. So that's where we're heading in class today. So once you've got that opened, oftentimes the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to bring in the existing image, and you do that by going to File and then going to Place. And that's how you can bring the image in. So that's basically what's happened to this file prior to or to get us to this particular stage. So you just File, Place, you navigate to wherever your file is saved. For you, it'll be on the T drive, and then we will take it from there. This is basically, how many of you have used Illustrator? Anybody? Has any of you used any of the other Adobe programs? Okay, so a couple of you. Realize that the Adobe programs are set up very similarly from one to the other. Each program has its own functionality, so of course they're different. But if you understand the basic function of an Adobe product, you can kind of you can understand most of them. The first thing I want to show you is that as I've got this opened, it's actually set up in an application frame. And what that does is, you can see here, it basically puts it so that the whole, everything for this application is all in this unified frame. This is typically how you're interacting with things on PCs. It's not necessarily the typical format for Macs. I like it because it puts everything together. But if you want it to look more like your traditional Mac interface, where you can kind of see the desktop and some of the other applications, you can actually turn that off by going to Window and Application Frame, and then it actually floats in here. So you've got your menu information that's taking up the whole space here, and then you can see other content below. So either way is fine to work. Just realize that if when you open it, it's not in the format that you like, you can change that. Something else that I want to show you is that these up here set up workspaces, and these workspaces are set up to make certain content available to you that's applicable to the type of work that you're doing. So right now I've got the essential set, and it's giving me this set of panels, and I'll explain the panels in a second. If I go to Layout, you can see that it adds some additional panels over here that are commonly used if you're going to be doing some form of layout, or if you're going to be doing typography. Different options show up here, and so realize that all of these options are possible. But if you know that you have a particular task in mind, it might be helpful to look at some of those presets up there. I'm just going to start off with Essentials, but just know that that those are available. In the event that there is a panel that you want, that you know is there, but that you don't see, you can always go up to Window. And up here, these are all of the additional panels that can be used. So if I hit on, I think I actually have color already open. Let's say I do Pathfinder. That opened up this Pathfinder panel. I can attach it here. I can actually create a new category. I can put it into any of these areas. But anyways, it gives you some options for how you interact with those panels. So those are panels. The panels are usually set up to address a certain type of task. So like your color panel is dealing with color. All of the panels here, they have kind of the initial preview, but a lot of them have additional options. You can usually change the size of them as well. If you want to see those, there's a little button here at the top right of every panel. It just looks like a bunch of lines, and it looks like the little drop-down arrow. But you can see if I hit Show Options here, it gives me a lot of additional things that I can pull up here in each individual panel, and that's going to be unique to every panel. So that's just how the panels work. I'll introduce some panels to you that we'll be using in the course of this project, but that's basically how the panels function. Over here, these are your tools, and so this is the toolbar here. The tools basically mean that if you click on a tool, then you can use the mouse as that tool. All right. So any of these tools, basically, once I select it, my mouse becomes that tool, and I can use it to accomplish whatever task it's designed to make. In addition, yeah, I'll leave that there. The other thing that you should be aware of is the menu. The menu is located up here. Again, this is a little different from those of you who are using PCs most frequently, is that, again, even if I've got the application frame, you can see that these options for Illustrator that are available up here as the menu bar is what this is referred to, those actually live outside of the application. So, but know that this applies to everything. So when I went to Window to pull up any of these existing panels, again, it's all part of Illustrator. And of course, with Macs, if I click on Finder, if I click on another application, it just pulls up that application and those menu items up here. So. Yeah, so there's a lot of functionality. Don't be intimidated because probably a lot of the stuff you don't use, but really using some of these elements are actually quite easy. All right. Any questions on kind of the overall interface? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the tools. You have two different selection tools. One is just referred to as the selection tool, which is the black one. The second one is referred to as the direct selection tool. And the direct selection tool is not filled in, it's white. I'm going to do something that you won't know what I'm doing, but that's okay. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. If I use my selection tool, if I use my selection tool and I've got an object like this image that I had brought in, you can see that I can just click it, select it, and I can move it around. So that's basically what the selection tool does, is it just does a basic selection for you of existing objects. The direct select tool allows you to edit the selection, so it's a little bit more specific. If I click on the direct select tool, what's going to happen to this frame is you're actually going to see the points. And this is something where I can actually move the individual points, and you can see that it's filling in the one that's selected, but the other ones are not filled in. And that allows me to edit this, and of course I'm stretching this, which is something you really shouldn't do, but it's actually just the frame, so it really doesn't matter. But I can edit objects directly, or actually the edges of objects, using this tool. So the black selection tool will just take an existing item and we'll just move it around. The direct select tool allows you to edit the properties of that object. I'll show you this again with an object that we've actually created in Illustrator, because obviously these are all just that's just all one image. So it'll make a little bit more sense in a second. The Magic Wand tool and the Lasso tool work just like Photoshop's. We're not going to use those for this first project, and so I'm not going to go into those in depth. The Pen tool is going to be one of the tools that we use most frequently in Illustrator. The Pen tool gives you a lot of flexibility to be able to draw a shape. So with the Pen tool, if I go ahead and click on it, I can click with my mouse, and then I can, I'm just moving my mouse, and then when I click again, it creates another point. And so I can keep creating points, and I can draw shapes. So this is a really ugly shape. You can see when I got to the end, when I come up here and I hover over this, do you see how the little circle showed up at the, can you see that? You probably can't, it's so far away. but there's a little circle that shows up on the pen tool, and that means that I'm completing the shape. And that's basically how we end up changing these line segments to a full shape. So if I didn't do that, the little circle disappears. When I click, that circle actually does show up. And so I can click on it. And that creates a full shape. Once I have a shape that exists, I can fill it with a color. That's what this area of the toolbar is for. Here you can see there's a color that's already been selected. That's the fill color. And I can also assign a color for the outline. And I can choose any color from over here. If I just hover over this, it just creates an eyedropper. And you can see it created this. No, it's really ugly, but maybe Christmassy as well. We've got this outline all the way around it. If I want to remove that, I just make sure the object is selected. I've got my selection tool, and I'm selecting that object, and I can turn off the outline. If I want to change the color, I can do that. I can modify the color by changing some of these. I can just select a different color from in here. If you have preset colors that you want to use, you can use some swatches over here, but we won't get into that just now. I think for now, just know that if you want to change the color, hop over here and you can choose a color appropriately. So that's basically how you create a shape. You'll note that as I created this shape, I just clicked and dragged to create these straight lines. If I want to use the pen tool to create curved lines, and again, I'm going to go into this a lot more in depth in just a second, but to create other lines, curved lines, I create a point. And you can see when I hover over that point, there's a little minus sign that shows up next to it. That means that if I click on top of that, it'll get rid of that point. So I'll do that here. But if I want to start a new point, I can click that there. And then let's say I want to create a curved line. I click my new point, but I don't release the click. I drag while I'm still holding the click down. And what this does is this creates what's referred to as a Bezier curve. And these Bezier curves are basically these just extra handles or lines that help define the curve. So when I release here, this is the point, but this little handle and this little handle are defining how big this curve is. So now if I continue on, you can see that this handle is helping determine how this curve is going to continue. So again, I'm just going to, again, I click and I drag. There's going to be a short moment there. But I can create fairly complex curves just by doing that process of click and drag. And so if I click off of this, with the direct selection tool, or I'm sorry, the selection tool, I can select that shape again. But if I click it with the direct select tool, what it does is it allows me to edit each of those individual points. And if I click on the points, it shows me what the curves are. So I can always come back in, I can edit those curves. I can say, okay, this looks really awful because there's this like point here and everything else has got curves. I mean, maybe I want to exaggerate that or move it. Or maybe I want to redefine it, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But that's basically how the pen tool works. To redefine it, I'm going to get the pen tool again. Usually I do keyboard commands all the time. Sometimes I do it without thinking about it. So if I do use one and you're not sure what I did, just ask. But like if I hit P, I get the pen tool. If I have the pen tool again and you hold Option down, it gives you this little this caret kind of a character. And if I click on an existing point with that caret that didn't have a curve, I can assign a new curve to it. I can also use that caret by just holding Option down to modify the lines here defining the curve. All right? Does that make sense? Yes. All right. Delete both of those. Another tool that you're going to use pretty frequently is the shape tool. With any of these tools that have this little arrow in the bottom right corner, that means that if you click and hold, then there are other options available within that tool. So even though the circle was the first thing that was available here, if I click and hold this down, you can see I can get a rounded rectangle, a polygon, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a circle here. If I hold Shift down, it'll make it a perfect circle. And if I don't hold Shift down, I can make ovals. If you hold Option down, it'll do it from the center. And then Option Shift makes it a perfect circle. That's just Option. Going from the center. Shift keeps it a perfect circle. All right, so I've got this object. Realize that when we're creating objects in Illustrator, oftentimes we want things to look precise and geometric. So if you have shapes that ought to end up being geometric, start by trying to create it using some of the tools here, as opposed to doing a freeform pen. Realize that a lot of what we're creating is going to require some of the freeform pen, but don't forget that you do have some of these simple shapes that you can use, and that can help make the work that we create appear just a little bit more professional. So you can see that. I'll show you some examples in a second. So those are going to be some of the primary drawing tools that you're going to use. I would say for right now, let's avoid the line segment, the paintbrush, and the eraser. Those things are tools that you could use, but to be honest, you're going to have better success using the pen tool and the shape tools, at least right now. There's also a type tool. You drag it, you type. You can change some of the type. Any tool that you select, content up here changes that's based on that tool. So now that I've got the type tool open, you can see I can choose different typefaces if I wanted. Let's get some mesquite going on here. I'm going to increase the point size here of the type so you can kind of see what's going on. Got some nice Old West going on. You can change color of type. That's the type tool. I keep going back to that same color. I'm not doing it purposefully. Other tools that you're going to use, I'll introduce in a little bit. There's the eyedropper tool. Let's say I want to draw a shape later on and I want to use the existing color. I can hit the eyedropper tool and hover over it. So let's do this. Let's say I draw a circle over here and I want it to have this color. If I want to have the same color, I just get the eyedropper tool, I hover over that color, I click, and it automatically adopts that particular color. So that's nice. It also will pick up type treatment. So if I wanted to type something and I wanted it to look like another type, I can use the eyedropper and it'll pick the color and the type style and everything. So that's nice too. So other things that you're going to use pretty frequently in navigation is going to be your zoom tool. And you can access that by hitting the little magnifying glass here. If you click and move it to the right, your mouse to the right, it zooms in. If you hold it down and you move it to the left, it'll zoom out. So that's kind of a nice feature, and it'll zoom in or out depending on where your cursor is located on the page. The other thing that I use very, very frequently is the hand tool. And what the hand tool does is it allows you to click, and then if you move it, you can look at a different area of the page. So for here, and I'm going to use the keyboard commands for these. If you hover over them, it'll tell you how to get those tools, like the zoom tool. You can get it going to Z. The hand tool, you can do H. These tools, I actually never use those tools. I use a keyboard command while I've got another tool, like a temporary keyboard command. And the keyboard command for the hand tool is the space bar. So if I've got this object selected and I hold the space bar, you can see that tool is still selected, but it just gives me a hand temporarily while I hold the space bar down so I can move it around. And then for the zoom tool, you just add the command tool to it. So if you hold spacebar and command, it'll give you the zoom tool, and it actually just gives you the zoom in. And then if you want to add the zoom out, you add the option key. So it's spacebar, command, and option will give you the zoom out. So anyways, just be aware of that. So I'm going to do that quite a bit. I'm just switching back and forth between these tools, and then when I release, I'm still at whatever tool I was using before. Realize this doesn't work very well with the type tool because it'll actually type the letter you're clicking, or it'll give you a space bar. So the other thing is these tools I switch back and forth between them pretty frequently using my keyboard. If I type V, I can get the selection tool. If I type A, I get the direct select tool. So if I'm doing any of those things, one, you can stop and ask me, but also just know that I'm just hitting buttons that are pulling up those tools because it's faster. Let's see, what else do I want to introduce to you here? Another panel, in addition to the color panel, that could be helpful is the transparency panel. And the transparency panel has these two circles and one's over the other one. It's kind of like showing things through. If you're changing the opacity of something, let's see, I've got this object and it's above this object. I can change this, and essentially if you reduce the opacity, you're increasing the transparency. So that can be helpful. And there are also all kinds of blend modes. If you've used Photoshop or any of the other design programs, these blend modes are pretty consistently used. And so you can apply any of these. So if you like multiply it, it works just like a multiply would and some of the other programs. So that might be helpful as well, that tool. Another panel that might be helpful is the outline panel. So I had added a really awful looking like red outline, but let's go ahead and just add like a blackish outline. Well, let's say I want this outline, but I want it to be a different thickness. Well, I can do that by going to the stroke panel. And the stroke panel is just dealing with outlines. You can see here it's 1 point. I can add points to it. There are some other options I can do here as well. If you're interested, if you wanted a dotted line or something like that, you can hit show options and you can change. If I had a, let's see, if I had a rectangle, for example. If I had a rectangle, let me zoom in here so you can kind of see what's going on. You can see here I can change how the corners are treated. So I can have it so that they're rounded corners. I can change it so that they like cut off the corners. I can change it so that well, there are a number of other things you can change. I won't go into all the details. If you have questions about that, you can always let me know and we can work on that. But that's basically, I would say those are probably the panels that you're going to be using the most frequently. You'll use your color panel, you'll use your stroke panel, and probably your transparency panel. There's one other panel that you're going to be using more than any other panel, and that is the layers panel. The layers panel allows you to set up content in basically in groups, grouping things together. The layers panel works very, very similar to some of the other programs, Photoshop, for example. But right now, I've been creating everything on the same layer. And if I click down like this, it shows me all of the different elements that have been created. And I can toggle the visibility of these layers on or off. So here you can see this is the image, the photograph that I brought in. So if I can turn that on or off. Another nice thing that I can do is if I click in this category here, I can lock it. So right now, if I go over here, I can select this, but I really kind of just want it to be in the background and I don't want it to be selectable. Then I can just hit lock, and then when I go to try to select it with my selection tool, nothing happens. So that's kind of nice, and you can turn it on and off. This object, you can see each of these objects has their own layer, so I can always come back in and I can edit them. But I could also move them to a different layer. So if I hold shift down, that just adds things. So if I hold shift down, I can add all of these to a different layer. And it's helpful to label your layers. So that way, my scan layer, when I click on it, it only has that scan on it, just that initial image. And then when I click on this layer, it has all of these elements that I've started to use. And then you want to layer the name. I'm just trying to say label the layers, something that makes sense. Yeah, if you click over here, it allows you to select that object. So that can be helpful every once in a while as well, particularly if you have an object that's hidden. Like this is hidden, and I'm like, I don't know where it is. Well, obviously I have to turn it on, but sometimes when you're working on something that's pretty complex, it's more helpful to find the layers over here. All right, so hopefully that gives you at least just an idea of how how you'll be using Illustrator. Let's go ahead and I'm gonna get rid of this. Let's actually start off with this initial scan. Remember, it's locked, so I'm gonna lock the whole layer instead. And I'm gonna create a new layer for this, so I just hit the new button down here, and we'll just call it Demo 2. So now what I'm going to be doing is everything that I create here is going to be on a new layer. I can still see this because I've got the visibility on, but it's locked, so what I create is not going to be selectable. I mean, what I create will be selectable, but this will not be as I'm working on this. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom in. Again, I'm just holding down Command and Spacebar, and I'm just moving to the right here. And let's go ahead and let's take this sketch, partly because it's kind of not very good, but also because it's pretty complex. And so I want to show you how we could end up creating this little figure here using some of the tools that we just talked about. I'm going to start off by using the pen tool because there's really not much going on here that's geometric, and so it's going to be really hard to create this shape. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by actually following really closely to the sketch, and then I'm going to do some edits to kind of make it look a little bit better. Realize the better the sketch is that you're starting off with, the easier it is to just kind of follow what you've already created. You can see the image is getting pixelated because it just wasn't scanned in a high resolution, but that's fine. I don't need that. That's not gonna, the final's not going to look anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and click here and create my first point, and then I'm just going to start going around this shape. I want to create a complete shape, but I'm going to choose, do you see that it's giving me this like really huge, here I'm going to keep going so you can see what's happening here. And so I'm just going to drag this so that my curves follow the curves that I created, that were created in this initial sketch. Actually, choosing where the points go can be a little bit of an art. But you can see here, it's kind of hard to see what's going on because it's starting to fill things in, and it's also giving me this really awful outline. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch my tools here. I'm going to turn, actually I'm going to leave the outline on. I'm going to turn the fill off. I'll leave the outline on, but I'm going to change the size of it. So that way I can see what I'm doing, but I can also kind of make it conform a little bit better to my initial sketch. Now I'm going to hop back to the pen tool, and I want to pick up where I left off. So I'm going to hover over that, that point where I left off, and there's a little dash sign that shows up next to my pen tool. That means, hey, it'll pick up this existing path. Otherwise, it would create a new point. And now I can keep going. And so I'm going to, I click and I drag. I click and I drag. Now here, this didn't follow exactly right, so I'm going to hold Option down to get the caret. And I'm going to pull that back a little bit so that I can actually get that curve that I was looking for. And then I can just continue along here. You know, I'm following pretty closely to the existing sketch for the most part. And then I complete it. Once I've completed it, it's now a complete shape. And now if I want to see what it looks like, I can just like switch the fill color so you can see what it's looking like. I could slide it over here to the side, and you can see that like it does look really close to the sketch, but it also looks kind of like really bad. So what we would do here is then we would say, okay, let's edit this a bit. Or I probably could have edited it while I was drawing it some too. But I do want to show you some of the things that we can do here. So you can see, if I zoom in a little closely, you can see that there's like an awkward point here where these meet. You can see that this isn't very smooth. You can see that like this space looks kind of tight and pinched. So using my direct select tool, I just hit it using A. I hit A, and that gave me the direct select tool. Now when I click on this, I can begin moving some of these things around to create a little bit better. I can change the angle of some of these things. Let's see here. Let's pull that down a little bit. It's a little bit better. So anyways, you can see I'm basically just going through here and I'm refining it. That was a bad place for the point. Actually, I probably just need another point. So I need some extra points, so I just hit my pen tool and I can add points to that existing path. And I can get rid of points. And again, I'm just holding Option down to make some of these edits. But this just gives me a little bit more control. You don't want to have too many points, but you also don't want to have too few. So anyways, it's looking a little bit better. I could keep doing this. There's still some like wonky moments here. Something that you want to watch out for is you want to have approximately the same amount of space between the curve and the line that's defining the curve on both sides. If you don't, like if I have that, you can see that the curve looks smooth. If I change it so that it's not, you can see that it ends up creating these like flat areas. And so that's a good rule of thumb. The other thing that you want to do is you want to choose very carefully where your points go. And the goal is to put points on either side of a curve. So one of the reasons that this looks so funky right here is because I put the point right at the apex of that particular curve. Well, it would be much more helpful if I had a point here and a point here that's defining either side of that curve. So you put points basically where things are about to change. So I'm going to go ahead and add those. I'll add a point there, and I'll add a point here. And then I'll get rid of that middle point. And what that does is by hitting A tool, the A tool here, I can go in and I can actually change this a little bit. So that way I have just a little bit more control over the... Well, I kind of like that, doing that. Yeah, I have a little bit more control over the curve. And the other thing is getting your handles to be about the same length will also improve that curve. So the curve looks better even though the overall shape is looking a little funky. So again, it comes back to how closely do you want it to look like your sketch. You can make it look pretty close to your sketch, but you can also do edits in other ways also. I would say we could make this look a lot better. If I hold shift down, I can move multiple points together. We could try to smooth this out a bit. I could say, you know what, I had this really kind of intense curve happening here, but I'm not a fan of that. So you can make adjustments. I don't know that that actually helped it, but basically that's how you create, or how you can create a shape using the pen tool and edit it. What I want to do now is actually I want to focus on this particular object here because this is going to look, this has some other features that I think it'll be a little bit more helpful for us to look at. Here, plus I think it's a slightly nicer shape. But here, one thing that I want us to think about is, for the most part, if we divided this in half, it should look the same on both sides. And so in Illustrator, we never draw both sides. We only draw one side, and then we mirror image it or we flip it. So I'm actually going to start off here on the left, and I'm going to go ahead and, actually I don't want to start there, I'm going to start right here. And you can see here, we've got this, this really nice curve, and I don't want to put the point, at the, actually I do want to put the point right here. Why do I want to put it there? I don't know. I just know that that's the best place for it. I want to put this point here because my curve is going to change at this point. So this is the point where the curve right now is going up this direction, and now I want it to come and turn around and go back the other way. And so because of that, that's where I want this next point. Typically, you're not going to go more than a half circle away from any given point. So here, I'll go ahead and add a point there. That's just a quarter of a circle. And then here, you can see this is the moment where this curve ends and this curve begins. And so that's where I want my point to show up. So I'll put that there. And you can see here I'm following much more closely to the sketch, and it's helpful that the sketch is a lot easier to work from. And then I'll go ahead and click there, and I'll drag this out so that it looks like it's kind of following that shape for the most part. Now, instead of continuing on, because I know that the right-hand side should look exactly like the left-hand side, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to complete the shape. And it's important to complete your shapes. If your shapes aren't fully completed, then you run into a lot of problems. So I'm going to go ahead and complete the shape, but you can see that it gives it like this weird growth thing going on here. I'll fix that in a second. So I'll complete the shape, and then what I'm going to do is just holding Option down while I've got my pen tool. I could also switch over to one of the other selection tools, but I don't want to switch my tool. I can take this handle and I can just turn it down here. And if I hold Shift, it'll make it perfectly straight up and down, perfectly vertical. So now I've got that. It's about right. I just hit the V, which gives me my selection tool, and I'm going to move this off to the side so we can kind of see what we're working with over here. So now that I've got half the shape done, and it looks pretty decent, what I want to do is I just want to take that same shape, that same object, and I want to flip it or mirror image it. To do that, I'm going to use the Reflect tool, and the Reflect tool is located here. either the reflect will be up or the rotate tool will be up. I'll actually show you the rotate tool first. With the rotate tool, if we have that, then I can click anywhere on my page, and this puts it at the center of the rotation. So that means that if I rotate this object, it'll rotate around that center area. If I put the rotation here, it would rotate around that. So that's how the rotation tool works, which is not something that's going to help us here. But the reflect tool, it works the same way. I assign where it's going to reflect, and so I want it to reflect right there. And then I'm just going to hold Shift here, so it puts a perfect reflection on the other side. Now, you can see when I do that, it's actually just taking my existing object and just mirror imaging it. What I really want to do is I want to take a copy of that object and mirror image it. To do that, you hold down Option and you click. So if you hold Option down, you can see when I hold Option down, do you see that it gives you like a double, there's like a double arrow here showing you that there's going to be the existing one and a copy. So now when I do that and I hold Shift down, it gives me a copy. And so now I've got two of the same thing. So now they're two separate objects, and there's some funky stuff going on here that needs to be addressed. But it's pretty good overall. There are a couple things that we could do at this point. I'm going to suggest, I'll just show you the easier way to do it. What I really want to do is I want to take these two shapes and I want to convert them into one. I want them to become the same shape. And to do that, we're gonna use another panel, and that's going to be the Pathfinder panel. So I'm going to go up to Window, and I'm going to go down to Pathfinder, and okay, here it is, Pathfinder. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select both objects, and I'm going to click this button. If I hover over it, it says Unite, and so basically it's going to make this one shape. So I hit Unite, and now it's one single shape. One of the advantages to that is now you can see, if we zoom in here, I've got this like little pucker that's happening here, and I don't want that. I think that looks pretty bad. Plus, it feels like that's really kind of thin right in here, and I don't really want that either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pen tool, and I'm going to hold down Option to get the caret, and I'm basically going to redraw this curve, and I'm going to get it so that it's nice and flat in the middle, but it doesn't get quite so thick. And if I hold Shift down, it'll keep these perfectly even. So that way, since I'm doing a mirror image, I want it to be perfectly even. So I'm holding Shift down. So now if I do that, and I click off of it, you can see it ends up, the shape looks just a little bit better. And actually, is it just me? Or is this thinner over here? I think it's thinner over there, isn't it? I wonder if I didn't hold Shift down when I released it. Oh, maybe they're 2 points. I think that's what's happening. Oh, did I undo? I must have done an undo. So they're separate shapes. Okay, sorry. All right, here. Now I've got that point. Okay. Yeah, now I've got that point. Hold the pen tool, hold Option down, and I click. And then I hold Shift. Actually, I got to drag this way. Otherwise, I was going to create a weird pucker. All right. There we go. Now we've got that shape. Now, it doesn't look necessarily exactly like the drawing, but it does look pretty similar. And actually, I still think it gets a little too thin, so let's redefine this again. Actually, I think that looks a little, no. That's good enough. Okay. So The next thing is I have this little circle up here, and it wasn't drawn all that well, but I think I want it to be a perfect circle. So to do that, I'll get the ellipse tool, and I want to draw it from the center because I know Illustrator is showing me where that center line is. And so do you remember what you click to draw a circle from the center and to draw it as a circle? Yeah, Option and Shift. Shift makes it a perfect circle. Option makes it go from the center. So then I can make the circle whatever size I want it to be. And so all of a sudden now I've got it there. And if I want to change the size of it, I can say, okay, it's just a little too big. I'm just going to do Option and Shift again to adjust the size here, and I can get the circle to be the size that I want it to. And so here you can see it actually this one looks a whole lot more professional. One of the reasons it looks more professional is because we did the same thing to both sides. But another reason is that just the initial drawing was just a little bit better, a little bit of a stronger drawing. Let's say that I wanted to get rid of the point that shows up down here, because like everything else has got a curved element, but this is kind of pointed. One thing that I could do to make that really, really smooth and easy is to just add a little bit of a stroke to it, and then go in here and change that to a curved element, and that just smooths things out a little bit, and it just adds just a little bit of extra like heft here. You wouldn't leave it this way, but I won't get into what you would do next with it unless you're curious about that for your own image. We'll do that later. Something else, you can see I just drew it in black. That's typically what we do when we start off with logos, is draw them in black. And one of the reasons that we do that is because usually at some point in time an image has to be in black and white. And so we want to make sure it works well just in a single color. But we can also add color later on. So typically we start in black and then we add color. Here, let's just give it a color. Make it orange. And so you can see I set the outline, and I would want the color to be the same. So I'm going to get my eyedropper tool, and let me click on that. Yeah, it will not. I'll add that as a swatch, so that way it's just easier. So when I select my fill color, I can hop over to swatches, and I can pick that same color. And so now when I click on it, you can see I've got that object. Now let's say one of these concepts used that symbol as a T, and this shape looks a little bit more like a V, but we could still make it work for a T. So let's go ahead and look at some of these type choices and try to pick some type that could pair with this, and let's see where we can go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the type button. I'm going to write out the name here. It's all caps, so I'm just going to hold it all caps for now. Jubilate. And it remembered that I was using Mesquite. And so thank you. I'm just selecting everything. I'm just scaling it up. Basically, I'm just using a keyboard command to do this thing here. You can see that the frame, like once it gets big, as to a certain size, the frame is not big enough. So I go back and I change the frame size here. Now what I want to do is I want to choose a typeface. Well, I look up here and I know a little bit about typefaces, so I'm going to say, okay, I want a typeface that feels kind of contemporary. I want it to be pretty simple. I want it to be all caps, and it looks like for the most part, I mean, when I wrote this, I didn't have any serifs on the type, so I'll try to find another typeface that has something kind of like that. So I'll just look at some of the examples that are available to me here. Myriad Pro could potentially do that. Let's change the size of this here. That looks a little bit similar. I would like, if you look at the design here, the letters are a little bit taller and thinner, and so I think I'd prefer something like that. So if I go to a condensed face here, that looks a little bit better, but it doesn't have the same heft that this did. So maybe we do a bold condensed. And it's a little too big, and here I spaced I'm pretending it's me, but the designer spaced this out. So I could go to my type. There are other things I can do to type here, and I don't seem to have my type panel open. So I'm going to go to Window, go down to Type, and I'm going to open up my character panel. I'm going to slide it over here and just add it somewhere so it's available. And what I want to do is, oops, that's not what I meant to do. What I want to do is I'm just going to add some extra spacing between my individual letters here. Let's make it quite a bit. And then I'm going to shrink the size of this down. And say, yeah, that looks pretty similar for the most part. I think it was a little smaller. And then realize that I was getting rid of the T. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I'm just going to add some spaces in. There are other things we could do there. But now I can start kind of moving this into place and seeing how these all kind of interact and try to get it so that it actually reads. And I would say this really does not read as a T. So that's disappointing. But you can see that we're starting to get a little bit more of an integrated mark here. Realize that if I change this from black to like a dark gray, for example, it'll just make it look just a little bit smoother. So let's see here. What if I go? Take it in this range here. It just takes some of the edge off of that, and it helps the colors look like they belong together just a little bit better. We could talk about balance and some of those issues. But once I've got that, now, if I want to make a copy of this, so I go ahead and select this, probably the first thing that I would do is I would actually just create a new layer if I'm kind of done with this. So I'll just copy that whole layer. I'll turn off that bottom layer, or I'll lock it maybe. And now on this top layer, I will try to do some other things. So I'll say, okay, now I'd like to actually try it where if I shift select both these objects, I can take them together. I can also group them together, but say, okay, well, you know what? Let's see what this looks like. If I just put that in the middle, and let's change the scale of this a bit. So I'm just holding Shift and select down. Anyways, there are a lot of things that you can try. Another thing, like you can see here on this initial one, if I was going to be doing that, so I'll just make another copy, and we'll do some other explorations here. I might try, oops, instead of having it all centered, actually that looked a little bit better with it not being quite so wide. But there are all kinds of ways that we could potentially try to get these to interact together, and all kinds of different type choices that we could potentially be using as well. But what I want to show you is type on a path. So we can also get type to actually follow a curve. So with this, there's a curve here. So I'm going to create a circle here. And I'm not going to fill it. I'm just going to make it empty. And then I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm just going to select and copy that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the type tool and do type on a path. And then I'm going to click on the path and I hit paste. And it puts my text on a curve, except that it's not the curve I want. So I can just drag that line to the inside, and I can kind of move this around. And so I might say, okay, let's move that whole circle up a little bit. Maybe we'll take both of these elements and, oops, I'm going to shift and deselect that. I'm going to scale this back up and say, okay, that's still not quite right. Let's modify where that type's interacting. So anyways, that's basically how you can do that. All right? Any questions on any of that? Yes?
So if you could Command J and you weren't correct.
Oh, when I actually merge those two shapes together. Command J works really well if you've got one point right on top of the other point. And that's how you can join it. I did try to do that kind of, but I didn't end up doing exactly that. What I really used to connect the two shapes was the Pathfinder tool. So the Pathfinder tool, and to be honest with you, what I should have done is I should have saved a copy of the shape that I created before I combined them together, because now I'd have to undo everything to go back and get that initial shape. So I probably should have saved that by itself. But let's see here. here. You don't have to follow along with this. I'm just gonna use this as the demonstration purposes. I'm gonna cut that object. What I'm doing here, I'll just tell you what I'm doing here. I'm taking a new object and I put it on the back, put it back behind the initial object, and I'm going to use a tool that's going to say, hey, cut the front object using the back object. So that's also in the Pathfinder. And let's see in Pathfinder. I thought I left it out, but where is it? Oh, it's right there. It's hiding in plain sight. So I'm just going to hit the minus back here, and it gets me back to the original image here. So what I had done with this is I had taken this object, I had selected the reflect tool, I had clicked right here, because I want that to be the axis of it flipping. It's actually going to work better because the shape's now a good shape. And then I held Option down and a Shift, which puts it in the exact same spot. And now what I did is I selected both of those objects, and instead of doing the Command J or the join, I went over to the Pathfinder tool and I just said, hey, unite these two shapes. I selected both of them, just make them one. And when I click on that, it actually did make them one. And because, of course, I chopped the shape that we'd already edited, it looks a little bit better now. So. The Pathfinder, you can get it by going up to Window and then go down to Pathfinder. It's also got these like squares that are like, yeah, so they may not have already been open for you. And realize that, you know, we can still modify this if we wanted to. Like, oops, did I undo it? So like here, if I wanted to just like change the, like, I wanted to make this shape a little bit more elongated, I could do that. Something's not right there. It feels like it's just a little off, doesn't it? Like it's not perfectly centered. But anyways, I'd figure that out if we were actually going to be doing something with it. But all right, any questions? Did you have questions? No. You're not even using the same program, so I hope not. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and get one of your sketches that you created for Bob's or Bruno, the Burger Bistro. Bob's Burger, that's completely different. Yeah, and go ahead and bring that into Illustrator, and then create a strategy. Say, okay, I'm going to use my pen tool, or I'm going to use shapes to begin creating this, and go ahead and start sketching using the pen tool. And I would encourage you again, lock the layer for your initial scan, and then you can work on top on an additional layer. You may want to start off with a simple mark or a simple version that you've created, or you can simplify it as you draw onto. And as you have questions, you're like, okay, I have no idea how to begin this. Let me know. I'll be available. Or you're like, I saw you do this, but I don't know what you did. That green is really gross. I didn't mean for that to be green.